Okay, well, I'm glad to see that we have quite a few people with us, and we're going to get started with our brainstorming the human condition. And we want to remind everybody that we are recording this. So if you prefer not to be recorded, then you can turn off your mic and don't say anything. And you can also turn off your picture. So we may see your name, but there's nothing being recorded except that your name shows that you are present. So that way you can protect whatever thing you want to protect. Okay, and we're also live on Facebook, so you should know that too. And so people can join us on Facebook and be a part of this and see all the things that are happening. So our guest today is Megan Phelps, and she is an author, and she has a very unique kind of history that we're going to talk about. That is the subject of her book. That is also a one-book selection by the South Dakota Humanities Council. So she's been doing a lot of talking around the subject that we're going to embrace today. So Megan, can you say hello to everybody, and so they'll know which one you are, and we're going to start talking about you.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Megan. As Lauren said, I wrote Unfollow, which is the subtitle is A Memoir of Loving and Leaving the Westboro Baptist Church. It's about my life growing up in the Westboro Baptist Church, which many consider a cult or a hate group. But really, it's just a community, a very small community of believers. They have a very specific set of ideology that was passed down by the pastor, my grandfather. And the church consists almost entirely of my extended family. They believe that they have the truth of God and everybody else is going to hell, and that it's their job to go out and inform the rest of the world what the truth is. And after that, it's up to God how they respond to it. So that's the religious upbringing that I come from.
Okay, that's a very interesting religious upbringing, and I want to talk a little bit about how did that affect you growing up? I mean, how did it impress you as a young person growing up in that? What kind of feelings, etc., experiences, etc., did you have?
There's a lot of fear. First of all, there's this deep sense of us versus them. Like, you understand that if you believe that the rest of the world is going to hell, and that if you listen to them or have comedy with them, that you are going to follow them down this path to eternal destruction. It definitely puts up a lot of barriers between you and literally everyone outside of our small congregation of about 70 to 80 people at any given time. So, I started protesting when I was 5 years old. And so I'm being put in a position to defend this ideology, advocate for this ideology in the face of a world that was really not ready to hear it and didn't want to hear it. We said very provocative and hurtful things to people. At the very first protest, we had a sign that said gays are worthy of death, and citing Bible verses. So it was an extremely provocative message, and people were really upset by it. So for me as a 5-year-old, I'm surrounded by the people who love me and take care of me and tuck me in at night. I trust them. I believe that they have my best interests at heart. And so when we go out there with this message that I understand to be the only legitimate truth in the world, and then to see people coming and not just shouting and being angry in response, but also physically attacking us, it definitely reinforced the message that my family was telling me, which is that these people are evil, you can't trust them. And so it's a very adversarial relationship that I grew up having with the rest of the world.
When you were growing up, were there things that either then and or now you felt that you were missing growing up as, not, well, whatever it is, were there
Yeah.
things that you felt were missing?
We were taught to see, so for instance, the fact that our lives, I went to public school, so I was seeing the way that my classmates lived. They were friends with each other, they hung out at each other's houses, they were not spending their free time, spending hours reading the Bible and studying it and memorizing it and going to church and then going to protests. That was not their life. That was my life. I was also the third of 11 children, so there's obviously a lot of work and childcare and things to be done. And there were times when I was quite young that I resented that sometimes, that I kind of wished that things were easier for us, that it wasn't so adversarial, and so all-consuming. But as I grew up and I understood, and especially because this idea was reinforced again by all of my parents and all the older people in the church, the idea that they called Westboro, basically almost everybody lived within about a 2-block radius of the church. And so, they would refer to Westboro as Mount Zion, right? This is the city of the living God. This is heaven on earth. So that framing, eventually comes to take over, that becomes what I think, this idea that gets repeated and reinforced over and over. And especially when we were taught, we would look and examine the way that other people lived, and we disdained that. Yes, they might have had time to hang out with each other more and, spend less time picketing, but, that's our ticket to heaven. Like, this is what God requires of us. And so their lives we basically saw, and I came to see, as meaningless. Even as I got even older, high school, college, and after, the church is almost entirely my extended family. And so I basically came to believe that I was never going to get married or have children, and that this was just my lot in life. And even that was something that I, had to, mentally bolster, like the idea that, okay, well, I just have to be happy about this. I have to be okay with this, because again, this is what God requires. There's just this heavy emphasis on serving God, serving the church, and nothing else matters.
Mm-hmm. Were there things that, let's say, ideas, experiences that you were cognitively aware of, or very aware of, that other than, relationship things, were there other things that you missed growing up?
I honestly felt, and especially because, my mother would quote these verses about obedience all the time. She would say that was, if you could sum up the Bible in 3 words: obey, obey, obey.
Mm-hmm.
And I think almost as a, self-protective mechanism. And then also just because it's in my nature, I think, to try to find the best way of looking at something, the most charitable way, like try to find the silver linings wherever I can and really focus on that rather than on the things that I didn't have. I really came to feel, I had a very cherished position in the church. As I mentioned, my grandfather was the pastor. My mom he passed away in 2014, but she was extremely close to him. She ran the day-to-day operations of the church, and had a lot of influence. So she called me her right hand. I was this, cherished daughter, and was entrusted with a lot of responsibility. And it was something that I really treasured, because again, I believed it was the work of God. And so I really tried to focus on, again, partly because there were times when I was a teenager when I, again, came to resent this. I worked so closely with my mother from the time I was 14, and she is a notorious micromanager. And I felt like it didn't matter, what I did. I could never, there was always something that I was going to mess up. I resented having no independence. Even I was almost 27 when I left, and I still had no independence. I lived at home. My mother knew where I was and what I was doing at all times. She directed all of my activities. It was not, there was no space to move in any direction. But like I said, when I focused on those things, everything outside of my little box, it would be miserable. Your life would just be, a kind of hell. And it didn't fit with what I was being taught about, again, my position and what God required of me. So it was all about, my mom would quote this verse about bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. So that was something that I really tried to do. And did pretty successfully. So I tried to focus on the things that made life there so kind of large and wonderful.
Now you're in kind of leading a different life, I would say. And something happened, I imagine, that turned on at least some lights in your environment. What were the kind of things that turned on those lights?
It really started with conversations on social media, on Twitter specifically. So I got on Twitter in 2009, and it was all just to publish the church's message. Again, we never thought that we could control how people responded, and so we never tried to. We just would preach the message, and then how it lands on people's hearts is the prerogative of God. So I was just posting the most, kind of hardline, heinous words that Westboro is known for. And pretty quickly, I started hearing from people, people who were, before I even quite understood what @mentions were or hashtags or anything, I was trying to figure out, what is this app? Like, how do I figure this out? How do I use this? And it became this process where these interactions I was having, people are asking questions, and they're the same questions I've answered hundreds of thousands of times before on picket lines all across the country. We protested every single day in the city of Topeka and traveled often. So at first it was nothing new. It was the same old questions, asked the same old ways. But one thing that was different about social media was that it gave us this buffer. When you're standing on a picket line and somebody sees this really provocative sign and they're responding in the moment, it becomes this very heated conversation on both sides, because, they're really upset and they believe that, and their position that's the mainstream position. It's generally and often not challenged, and especially not challenged in that way with this, again, very loud sign. So they're kind of surprised and taken off guard. And I'm coming in, and all the rest of the members of the church being, so certain that we have the truth, and we just have to, we're gonna tell you a thing, And so there's very little room for real engagement, real connection. It's just these shouty talking points. And on Twitter, it started out as that. But people pretty quickly recognized that I really believed that I was doing the right thing. And so there was this kind of this collection of individuals. It wasn't any particular group of people who got together and tried to reach me or something. It was just people who were curious and started asking questions and kind of digging into the nuances of Westboro's positions on all these doctrines. And in the midst of that, after a lot of back and forths over time, a couple of things happened. First, they were able to find internal inconsistencies in Westboro's doctrines. And that was mind-blowing to me, because Westboro is also full of lawyers. Both of my parents are attorneys. And so they're extremely analytical. And like I said, we spent a lot of time memorizing Bible verses. So we knew the Bible, we knew the verses, and we could bring them up at a moment's notice in response to these questions. And so for somebody to find an internal inconsistency, when we thought, it's well, if this is the truth of God, how can we possibly be wrong? So that was really kind of earth shaking for me. But then there was also another aspect of those conversations, which was that Twitter became, like, for the first time in my life, this alternate source of community for me. So I did go to public school, but I always knew there, like, to keep people at arm's length. I never got too close to them. I never spent time outside of school really with them, outside of occasional sports. I played volleyball for a couple of years and I ran track, but there wasn't even there, like, in physical space with other people. I always knew to keep them away from me. And online, it was different. Like, there was this sense of safety just because we were physically distant from one another. We had this buffer of time and space so that when discussions did get heated, we could step back and, come back to the discussion later. We could talk about other things, books and movies, and I was seeing on Twitter other parts of their life. It's not like on a picket line where all you're seeing is the rage in this person in this moment. It's like, now I'm seeing, like, what you ate for breakfast and your pets and your family, and seeing friends talking to one another and joking, and there was just this part of me that really resonated. Like, I started to see the people that we were targeting as human beings and to really value those connections, even though I basically still believed, and even in spite of those few contradictions, I still thought that they were wrong and probably going to go to hell. But these are humans, and it's worth talking to them instead of just kind of shouting and telling them off.
So that moment can you remember a particular moment that someone said anything or did something, or a particular kindness or something that kind of started that avalanche or domino flow?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just the willingness to engage with me, with seeing me as a human being, that was huge. That's not a single moment. That is a collection of a lot of moments that people had to be willing to have those conversations, even though they thought I was doing terrible things and terribly cruel things. So that really amazes me, that willingness. But there are absolutely moments where specific moments where I remember kind of being set back and feeling like at a loss, for the first time, at a loss for, like, oh my God, how could we be wrong? Or these things that I've spent all these years defending, like, this no longer feels right. So I remember a couple of specific conversations where, people found these internal inconsistencies. I remember those vividly. I would say, though, maybe one of the more, because again, as Twitter became this new community for me, I started to care what they thought and how they felt, which was a completely new experience. And so, when I first joined Twitter, when a celebrity would die or some tragic thing would happen and it would suddenly be in the media, like, how it works on Twitter, like, all of a sudden there's this avalanche of information and everybody's responding to what's happened. And so I would very joyfully jump in there and say, that person, that I don't know, celebrity, Michael Jackson or Brittany Murphy or Patrick Swayze, these were like super early ones that I remember who passed away early on. And I would, talk about how they were in hell and all they wanted was a drop of water to cool their tongue because they're tormented in the flames of hell. And if you follow them, then you're going to go to hell too. Just again, this very, and over time I started to feel guilty. Like, I started to empathize. So for instance, the one that I remember very vividly, somebody tweeted a photo essay from the Atlantic magazine about a famine in Somalia. And I clicked on the link and I saw the first photo. And instead of feeling, again, what Westboro feels, which would be, this is the judgment of God and these people deserve it because they're not following him, I just started crying immediately. I felt totally broken. My mom's desk was about 5 feet from mine, and she looked over and she asked me what was wrong. And I couldn't speak. I just pointed to the screen. because I was crying so hard. And because it was just this tiny, emaciated child, like a little tiny baby, and his head was so much bigger than it's the thing that, you know, is just wrong. Like, this is not what a human child is supposed to look like. It was horrifying. My mom saw that, and she kind of eagerly says, you know, asked me to send her the link to that article so that she can write a Godsmack about it, to say, we had a blog with Godsmacks to enumerate all the ways that God was punishing this country and this world. And that moment, I'll never forget that. I will never, and a huge part of that came from, you know, being on Twitter, and starting to see how other people, it's like it was giving me permission to feel empathy for people that I didn't see in the community around me, the physical community around me at Westboro. You know, my husband, Chad, he wasn't my husband at the time, he was an anonymous Twitter user. And, you know, it was a question that he kept putting to me, you know, over and over time. And it was about, you know, like, what about the families of these people? Like, I'm reading the verses that you're sending, that you're posting. Like, but how can you go to the family in this moment and say these things to him? He's kind of forcing me to think about the effect we were having on people. Those conversations were enormously significant in changing how I thought and how I felt about other people.
Can you talk a little bit about what kind of effects that you think that kind of approach to people that Westboro has, what kind of negative effects does that have to other people? Now that you've had a chance to reflect on that, can you talk a little bit about how, you know, what that's like, or what have you discovered?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with people who were negatively affected by Westboro. I think the most difficult things for me to think about are the funeral protests. You know, we would go, and it wasn't just standing outside with signs, which the signs themselves were, I cannot imagine at this moment, you know, growing up at Westboro, nobody close to me had ever died. I'd never gone into a funeral of someone that I deeply cared about. And so I had really no experience with grief. So part of it maybe was ignorance, but it was just, you know, we were taught to see people in this extremely limited way. And so we would stand out there, not just holding signs saying things like, God blew up the troops outside of a soldier's funeral, or thank God for dead soldiers. We were not just, you know, holding the signs quietly. We were standing on American flags, often dancing on American flags, right across the street in many cases, from the door where people were going in to bury their loved ones. And we were singing at the tops of our voices, parodies of patriotic songs. And, you know, these songs, the lyrics are written to be as biting, many of them as biting and cruel as possible. And it's so hard to think about that, because now, you know, now having gone to funerals, and even when I don't know the person, I am at a complete loss and looking at these people grieving and feeling so horrible about the fact that we took this moment that should have been about celebrating the life of that person. It should have been about their family and their loved ones. And we made it about us in the most cruel way possible. And that feels unforgivable to me. And that's really hard to think about. But there were other ways too. You know, we protested so many schools, high schools and universities, even preschools. We protested a Jewish day school. And, you know, when you have kids who, kids who are in the closet or whether they're in or out, like it's hard especially when they hear people around them, reaffirming like, oh yeah, like Westboro's approach is wrong, but they're totally right. Gay people are, so we're just lending our voice in a way that is, hurting all these people. And so when I hear from people who say things like, that they used to consume Westboro's content as a form of self-harm, like that they believed that they deserved that kind of disdain and cruelty, that they were just horrible people, kind of reaffirming everything that in some cases their families were telling them too, that they're worthless because they're gay, that they need to change, that they have to change. It's really difficult to think about those things in the way that we affected people.
Well, we're going to go and open it up to some questions, but before we do that, I like to personalize our group here so that we aren't like shadows. So I would like everyone to kind of, say your name and where you are and one thing that you think is special about you. So why don't we start with Jennifer, since on my thing, Whitman. Since on my thing, you're the first one up.
Oh, sure, Lawrence. Start with me. I have to say something special about me, huh?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'm Jennifer Widman, and I am with the South Dakota Humanities Council. So I'm here from my home in Brookings. I have the great good fortune to coordinate the One Book South Dakota program. So I've been able to work with Megan, and it's been delightful. I think this book absolutely has some incredible insights for how people relate to one another and how we can talk to one another better, as well as just the idea of opening up to new ideas, holding different ideas in our minds. What's special about me, I suppose, is, and maybe this is based on my reading, but I think I am pretty good at seeing multiple viewpoints in any given situation. And you would think that'd be pretty common, but it doesn't seem to be sometimes when you look around. So that's me.
Well, thank you. Ryan, I get the top level first, of the top row in my gallery. Ryan.
I'm Ryan Woodard. I do communications for the South Dakota Humanities Council, and I live in Sioux Falls, but I'm actually in Doniphan, Nebraska, visiting some friends right now at their lake house. So it's a good time. There's 3 huge bulldogs running around, so there hasn't been very many dull moments yet. What's special about me? I think I'm pretty open-minded, and always trying to learn different things, and like that comes from reading a lot, kind of like Jennifer said. So
okay, good. Carolyn.
I have to unmute myself. I'm Carolyn Speakman. I am the office manager for the South Dakota Humanities Council. I am at my home in Brookings with Kendra Burkhausen, who is Jennifer's festival assistant for the Humanities Council. What's special about me? I don't know so much. No, I'm just kidding. I try to be fairly open-minded, and I have a strong desire to learn and understand other people's viewpoints and the way they perceive things. So I think just my desire to want to know more is special about me. Do you want to talk, Kendra, since you're next?
Yeah. I was gonna pick on Kendra.
Okay. Like Carolyn said, my name is Kendra. I am also at her house. Something special about me, I guess, I also have just kind of an innate curiosity about just about everything, and I like to ask questions and get to know people for who they are, as well as what they think about other things.
Mm-hmm. Phyllis.
Hi, everybody. Excuse me. Phyllis Koldai. I'm a writer. I live in Brookings. And I really value conversations like this. So thanks to everybody. Something special, I guess I believe in and have experienced the power of stories. And that's one reason why I wanted to be part of this conversation today, because the story that is being discussed here is instructive in so many different ways. And so thank you.
Nancy? You have to turn on your mic, Nancy. Either that or go outside and yell loud.
I'm already outside.
Oh.
I've noticed I'm out on my deck. And I have a long history with humanities. I was just thinking what to say special about it. And I remember fondly the grandmother of the present One Book South Dakota was a Read Around the World series. And several humanities scholars had regular stops, and we'd go out to different communities. Valley Springs, South Dakota was mine, and I had a partner, Leroy Meyer, who is unfortunately no longer with us, or he would be right here today. And I retired from USD, but I haven't retired from life or learning, just the papers.
Yeah, there you go.
So I have been interested from day one in one-on-one conversations that are meaningful, particularly with people who are different from myself and offer many, many things that people like us don't. And I never know where to find them, but I'm always looking. So I guess that's enough about me.
Okay.
Happy to be here.
Betty, South Dakota.
Good morning. There's a story behind that today, but I won't talk about that. I live in Aberdeen and I'm at home. And I, like Nancy, have given up all the paperwork unless that I wish to do. And this is my time to grow as a human being. So I spend a lot of time reading, and I do a lot of artwork, and painting is my usual mode. I think my empathy and understanding for people will always continue to grow. I hope so, because it means a lot to me to meet people and hear who they are, see who they are. And so this is a wonderful opportunity. And thank you. I've been anticipating it.
Naima.
Hello, I'm Naima, and I'm at home in Elkton, South Dakota, which is a fabulous place. And I too enjoy reading, but I like getting out there or Zooming to get to know people, as it were, with COVID and different things like that. I'm 71 years young. And what can I say about me? There's so much. I have to write a book. I need help, fellas. Yeah. But anyway, the best way to describe myself is I'm unique. I am very, very, I'm very, very, very unique. And there is no one like me. The mold was broken, so you have to get me as I am for as long as I'm here, because I'm the only one.
Great. Barbara. Can you turn on your mic?
Yes, Lawrence.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, I'm Barbara Johnson, up in COVID jail, up in Aberdeen. And I enjoy being a humanities scholar very much, and I enjoy these discussions extremely. That's it.
Okay. Well, I can say, Barbara didn't say how she's special, but I can say that she is real special. She does stained glass, which is, glass work, which is really wonderful. And I've been envying that for a while. At some point, I'm going to do some glass work, even if it's just break a window. You know, I'll do something in glass. Deb Grady.
Hi, you've seen my picture going in and out. I don't know what's going on now. Anyway, I'm in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. What's special about me, maybe as I'm a retired teacher, but I think I'm a teacher 24/7 the rest of my life. My son used to say, Mom, it's the summertime. You're not a teacher here. If I talk to the neighborhood kids, I said, Chris, when you're a teacher, that's just part of your personality. I'm a teacher everywhere. And I love all the classes to be able to keep learning. I think that's something a lot of us share, that love of learning.
Well, thank you, Deb, and glad to have you with us. I think this is your first time with us, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Fedora, can you turn on your mic and tell us about who you are?
Okay, hi, I'm Fedora Sutton, retired faculty from SDSU. I am a scientist by training and a humanist at heart. My aim, my desire, what's special about me is my desire to make this world wholesome, and hopefully that's pretty much it. That's what I like to do. We just started with Naima, a new entity. It's Brookings Justice, Equity, Transparency Org. And it's all focused on making the world a better place. Justice and equity for all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fedora, for joining us. I believe this is your first time too, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, okay. That's Naima bent my arm.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. She's known for
She didn't have to bend my arm. I was interested. Yeah.
I thought you said she bit your arm. I was going to say, I didn't see any blood.
I was interested in hearing Megan's story, and so far it's very, very informative. And thank you, Megan.
Yeah. Susan.
My name is Susan Osmus, and I'm here in Brookings. I'm a retired preschool special education teacher. And I guess what makes me special is that I love to learn. I'm always wanting to learn new things.
Okay, good. Thank you. I think this is your first time too, isn't it, Susan?
Yes, it is.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll come again.
Yes, Anne. I think I will.
Thank you. Anne, you need to turn on your mic.
Good, yeah. Good morning. I'm glad to be here today. I'm Ann Vollen, and I'm at the South Dakota Humanities Council. I'm the executive director, and I am just so fortunate to get to be part of this conversation. I think what makes me special is I just love any opportunities we have when we get to share ideas and talk about them and think about how we can make things a little bit better. So I appreciate everyone's interest in being part of that. And thanks, Lawrence, for moderating as always.
Thank you. Thank you. Sheila.
Good morning again, Lawrence. Yes, I'm Sheila, Aberdeen, South Dakota. I'm retired with many hats. And I think what makes me special, I would say, if you have something you want organized, I'm your person. I love to organize things and put things together. I think that's half the fun of anything. And I'm especially interested in justice issues, and I lean very heavily towards Native American issues in South Dakota. And I am presently the chair of the Aberdeen Area Diversity Coalition, and we just finished our Zoom meeting, and that's why I'm late.
Well, thank you for coming again, Sheila. Haley, are you live and with us?
I'm here. I'm Haley Delaney. I'm the CARES Act coordinator at the South Dakota Humanities Council. Currently, I'm in my room at home in Brookings. And I suppose what makes me special is I'm passionate about the spread of information and access to information. And it takes me to places like this. So, yeah.
Well, great. Melinda.
Good morning. I'm Melinda, and I am the grants coordinator at the South Dakota Humanities Council. Normally I'm in Brookings, but at the moment I'm in Pennsylvania helping to care for a 5-year-old grandson and a newly born 2-week-old grandson. So that's a joy. Like many of the rest of the people that have already spoken, I think I share that common thread of wanting to hear other people's perspectives, because often when I hear something from another person, it challenges me to be probably maybe more empathetic and compassionate in my approach to things, which I think I can always get better at. Something that's special about me is I love to knit and create. I've been doing it for over 50 years and have learned a lot during that time about knitting. So I just make little baby sweaters and I give them away, and it just brings me lots of joy. So that's what's special about me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Melinda. So we'll get back to Megan now. And Megan, you've undergone some interesting transitions as you've elucidated here. How can the rest of us help more people, not just in Westboro, but people who have ideas that are centered around around limited exposure? And I think that tends to be a common thread with people who are very sure of themselves. And how the world works is that they typically don't have many experiences to contradict that notion. So how can those of us who have some different, maybe not any better, but some different notion, how can we best talk to people who are, let's say, for lack of a better word, bigoted, or just, like narrow focus on a particular point of view? How should we approach that?
I actually gave a TED Talk about this a few years ago, and I spent a lot of time thinking about that question and trying to distill exactly what those people on Twitter did, that ended in me changing my mind. Like, how were they able, how specifically, what are the actionable steps that they took that we all could learn from? So it's a little bit, I feel a little bad about the fact that I basically just stole their wisdom, but I did it for a good reason. And so the 4 points that I came up with were, the first one was to not assume bad intent. Like, if you can assume good or neutral intent, even in people who, in your mind, or if you understand them to be behaving badly, if you can assume that they have come to those positions honestly, that they, for whatever reason, whatever life experiences they had that brought them to those positions, that it wasn't because they're an evil person wanting to do evil things. Generally speaking, when you're talking to somebody with, we can just refer to it as bad ideas, if you're talking to them, you can see that they generally, they really believe it's the right thing, that they have found the answer. This is how we should live. So, because if you assume bad intent, you kind of immediately cut off the conversation right there. Because if you just believe they're an evil person doing evil things, then why even have the conversation? Why try to make this connection? It kind of, again, it cuts off the conversation before it even gets started. The second thing is to ask questions, which serves several purposes. It helps you identify exactly what they believe rather than the assumptions that you have about what they believe. maybe you've heard similar ideas before, and so you kind of ascribe all of these beliefs to a person who hasn't even expressed them. So it helps you understand where they're coming from so that you can actually construct your arguments to address what they're actually saying and what they actually believe. Another thing about asking questions is that it's a signal to the person that they're being heard, which kind of makes them more likely to be willing to listen to you. So, people on Twitter would ask me all these questions, and, I would answer like as I did. And then, eventually you get to the place where like, they're just kind of nodding along, listening to what I'm saying. And I'm like, well, what do you think? It's kind of this natural next step in the conversation. If I feel like I'm being heard, I'm more likely to want to listen as well. And sometimes that takes time, but it is a common occurrence. The third point was to stay calm, which is really different. I mean, it seems like an obvious point, but it's a really difficult thing to do when you're talking about values and beliefs that are deeply held on both sides and in conflict with one another. It is so hard in the moment to be willing to, take a deep breath, step back, and stay calm and actually be considerate and deliberate about what you're going to say next. It's hard to do this with strangers on the internet. I think it's often even harder to do with people that you love, because there's almost this sense of betrayal. Like, how could you possibly believe this? I thought you were a good person. So it's really difficult thing to do, I think, for just generally speaking. But if we can be deliberate and intentional about how we engage, and this is also why I think online communication can be really powerful. I feel like it's kind of well documented, all the things about online communication that make it more difficult. You're not seeing the person, in real life. You don't have all those feedback, cues that you have when you're talking to someone in real life. But one of the strengths of online communication and written communication generally is that you do have time and space, that buffer that I was talking about earlier, where you get to decide when and how you're going to respond. It feels like you need to respond immediately, but you don't actually have to. Another thing is that sometimes, I've been thinking about this lately, it can feel so delicious, is probably the best one I can think of, that, to write the most cutting thing in response to something. Like you can make a really great point. This person that said something so dumb or whatever, however you want to put it. It feels so good sometimes to write those things, but you don't actually have to send it. You can see that, like, yes, you've made the point, but now how can you make it in a way that the other person can actually hear you? Because if they can't hear you, then it's all for naught. All you've done is proven how smart you are in your own mind, and not done anything to further the conversation. And in fact, that almost always ends the conversation. So staying calm, very simple, but not easy. And then the final point that I made in that talk was to make your argument. So I talked about the community aspect of Twitter and how important that was. And it absolutely was. I don't think I could have heard the arguments that they were making nearly as well without that. But if it had stayed right there, just as, people were nice to me, I don't think that ever would have been enough for me to break out of that ideology. You actually have to make the argument, make your case for why this person is wrong, and more specifically, what is a better way, right? So you have to actually, and I think there's another thing, this also seems obvious, but when we assume, like when we feel things so deeply, we assume that the goodness and the value of our ideas is or should be obvious. And that's not the case. If we all have different experiences that lead us to these different positions. And so if we don't find a way of communicating our position in a way that makes sense and that could possibly persuade someone else to change their mind, so it really is important. It isn't just about being nice. It isn't just about making the connection. It's also about making the case, presenting the evidence. And you don't start there and you don't end there, but it's an essential part of the equation. If I had had more time, they gave me 15 minutes and I used exactly 15 minutes when I gave that talk. I would have added a fifth point, and that is to take heart, be patient. Especially when you're talking about changing deeply held beliefs, it's not something that happens in a moment. It can be. I mean, eventually, like I remember the moment when it finally clicked, like, oh my God, what if it's not just these few issues that Westboro is wrong about? What if the whole thing is backwards? What if we're just people? That was the actual thought. What if we're just people? So eventually it does come to a moment where the change happens, but there's a lot of work that goes, before that. I think, the epigraph of my book is this line from The Great Gatsby that says, reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. And to me, that encapsulates the idea of grace, the willingness to see other people as being on a journey. This person that you're talking to, they are not who they are, and that the sum total of their personhood does not exist in their worst moments. It's not just how they're behaving in this conversation. They've had a lifetime of experiences up to this point that have led them there, and who knows where they're going to be 2 years from now, 5, 10 years from now, 2 weeks from now. They're on a journey, and we can contribute if we are willing to, again, be deliberate and intentional about how we engage. We can contribute to this person's journey in a way that can hopefully change things for them for the better, help them see outside of those things. And so it does take patience, and you can't expect things to change immediately, but it's worth engaging for so many reasons. It's worth taking the time when you have that time and the space and the emotional wherewithal to engage. When you have that, go for it.
I'd like to open it up now to questions from our other participants. Anyone have questions for Megan?
Can I just say something?
Yeah, sure.
Megan, you go, girl. I already put that. You go because you went. Now I'm following what you're saying, and it's fabulous. Can I put you on the spot and give you 2 ideas? Masks with Corona, and you are less than human because you don't look like me. You're colored.
You say you want to know my position on masks?
Oh no, just with how you dealt with everything, looking at your TED Talk points. What would you say would be your response to those particulars?
Wait, I'm not quite sure what you're asking me about masks, though.
Oh, the resistance, the clash between the two.
Wearing masks or not wearing them are deeply held beliefs.
Right,
Yeah,
I know.
sorry.
It's really frustrating. It's not just it's not just about the mask issue. It seems like every question about the virus and everything else, every public issue is now a political issue. And this is the whole, the polarization that we have in this country, the political polarization. It just is all encompassing at this point. And that's really bad. I don't know, actually NPR, I saw on Instagram yesterday, they had a thing about, how to talk to people about masks. Like you can, you make it about, use we language. Like, can we put, if somebody's not distancing a store or something, can we put 6 feet between us? Like they gave several examples of what specifically to do in that situation. But I think the bigger issue is the lack of engagement, of good faith engagement on both sides on all of these issues. Like we have to find a way of depolarizing the entire climate, because until then, we literally can't agree on facts of any kind. There is no shared sense of reality. And so I think it's going to start with these human connections before you get to really changing someone's mind and behavior. And, unfortunately, in the middle of a pandemic, that's it's horrifying. It's horrifying that things are where they are in this moment. I really hope things change very soon. I mean, specifically, I'm thinking about the election, but we don't have to talk about politics specifically right now. But, yeah, I really do.
I think what I'm drawing from your comments, Megan, is that it's really about how people feel more than what they think. And if you don't change how they feel, you will never get to what they think. And,
absolutely.
And I found that true on so many levels, is that we first have to change how people feel about us, you know, as a person. Yeah. If they feel different about us, the framework in which they get the information or whatever data will be completely different. The filter is going to be different. So what they finally receive will be different.
100%. Yeah. So, I mean, it's the difference between, you know, feeling attacked and forced into doing something versus, you know, persuaded. Like, you actually do change their mind about the necessity of doing this thing.
Or you make them think that they changed their mind.
Yeah. This reminds me that what you just said about the thinking versus feeling, both matter, right? They both matter, but the emotional side of this is really key. There's a book, and I just should recommend that everybody read it. It is amazing. It's called The Righteous Mind. It's by Jonathan Haidt, who's a professor at, actually, I don't want to get that wrong, so I'm gonna, I don't remember where he's a professor. I think Columbia, maybe NYU, if we're not quite sure. But he's, the subtitle is Why Good People Disagree on Politics and Religion. And it's a really fascinating book, and talks about how, you know, so much of, we feel first, we come to our answer first, and then we post hoc justify it. We use our, our higher brain to justify the reactions of our lower brain. And so it's a really fascinating book. Anyways, I don't want to get too off track, but I think it's a really valuable thing for this whole conversation. And then what was your other, I forgot your other question, Naima.
It was just how, I think you answered both of them with the how the emotional, especially how do you feel about me? Right. That I think you answered the blueprint on how to deal with people on both. Thank you very much. That was good.
Okay. Yay.
Fedora, you had a question.
Yeah. Megan, I'm wondering though, if you were not already having questions in yourself and about the teachings you were receiving and everything in order to be receptive, or because I'm kind of thinking that unless you're already inclined to something, it's easier to get you to another place. Whereas if you are absolutely not inclined, I mean, you don't even look in that direction. How was it with you?
Yeah, if you look there, I did so many interviews. So for instance, I think maybe an easy one to point to, the BBC has made 3 films now about Westboro. So the first one, I was 20. The second one, I was 24. And that was just after I got on Twitter. And so you can you can actually see the evolution. And then the third one just came out last summer. So it was after I left. And so I was talking about all of these things. You can see what I was like at 20, how extremely close-minded. I was so certain, you know, there was no openness there. There was no willingness. You know, people sometimes would, you know, think that, you know, in other words, it had to come from me first or something. Mm-hmm. And man, I was so resistant to any idea that was contrary to Westboro's doctrine. I was so unwilling. Like, I was willing to hear it only because I believed I already had the answer to it. You know, I was fully indoctrinated and a hardcore believer. Again, my whole life was dedicated to to Westboro and defending that ideology and propagating that ideology. It was my especially after I graduated from college, it was my whole life. I worked for the church. I worked for the family law office. I basically spent all my time, and there's actually a section of the book about that time. I think it's the end of chapter 6 maybe, where I'm kind of detailing all of like what my life looked like. It was 100% Westboro all the time, and standing up in the face of a world like this was a constant. It wasn't just like we stay in our church. It was constant engagement with people in a very adversarial way. So you really couldn't have somebody more dedicated than I was. And so this is why it's so powerful to me, the idea of like those connections that I thought, we literally had a saying at the church. We would say, we have nothing to learn from these people. Like we don't need anything from them. We have nothing to, what do we need to hear from these people? This should be a one-way conversation. And yet on Twitter, I changed as a result of what I learned, how those interactions took place. Like, so when I think about, it's like part of me does want to believe. Part of me wants to think, oh, like there was some good in me before and Twitter just brought it out or something like that. I want to believe that I wasn't completely, again, when I think about, and I'll try to shorten this answer soon, but when I think about the things that we did, it is devastating, especially those funeral protests. The things that we did were so horrible, so cruel to those people. I want to believe that I did it against my will, that I felt bad about it, but I didn't feel bad about it. I believed it was justified. I thought we had to do it, that it was our duty to God to do it. And that didn't change until Twitter. I didn't question it. I would occasionally have doubts and I would immediately quash them. I believed that my heart was evil, that this is how Westboro sees, the human heart is desperately wicked, and full of deceit, and you can't trust your heart. So anytime I had a doubt about Westboro, which was very, very rare, if I did have a doubt, I assumed that I was the problem, and I completely bought into all of it. So I do, obviously, I'm sure, to try to answer your question more specifically about if somebody's more inclined to listen, that's wonderful. That's a huge opening. But I would say that I listened in spite of myself, not because I wanted it. I didn't want to leave. Leaving was the worst possible future that I could have imagined. Like, it was my worst nightmare. And so, and I don't know if you've read the book, but if you do, you'll see the utter heartbreak. Because when you leave, you lose the only people that we were ever allowed to have a relationship with. They are they still are. They're my family. I miss them terribly. As horrible as things could be sometimes, they were also really wonderful, loving, resourceful, generous to a fault among themselves, especially, people. And I miss them horribly. I felt no inclination to leave. It was the worst thing I could imagine. And so that's, for me, that's partly why I believe so strongly in the power of conversation to change hearts and minds, because I could not have been more closed-minded. And so the fact that I am now where I am, it still blows my mind when I think about it. And when you watch those old interviews with me, like, I think you'll see it too. It's insane. I would say how much things have changed in such a relatively short amount of time.
So other people, do you have other things that you would like to inquire of Megan or each other? I think we have quite a bit of of information that we've shared, but I want to give people a chance to dig into this subject more, because we don't always have Megan with us.
May I jump in, Lawrence?
Sure.
Megan, thank you for so much. But I find myself thinking a lot about your grandfather. And I will get political. I think about Donald Trump sometimes, and you know what created him, and I think about your grandfather. Do you have any insight into what molded him? And then I would assume that he had an amazing force of character or something that allowed this to become a generational, I don't know what to call it. Yes. Could you reflect on that a little bit, please?
Yeah. So Gramps, I think he had a pretty normal, his mom died when he was 5. I think it was when he was 5. And so he was raised largely by an aunt of his. The early stuff that I've read and talked to people and heard from him. He was an Eagle Scout. He was a very dedicated student, graduated at the top of his class. And so he was really active and very accomplished. And at 17, he got the principal appointment to West Point Military Academy. But I think he was actually 16. He had to wait until he was 17 before he could actually enroll. And in that summer, he got saved at a tent revival meeting in Arizona. And I think it seems like things really changed at that point in a few different ways. He had been Methodist before, I think, not really very religious. I think a couple of things. I think two things that made Gramps, turned him kind of into the character that he became. One is that he's very smart. He knew he was very intelligent. And now he's been, introduced or reintroduced, if you will, to this book, the Bible, that purports to have all of the answers and to be the one true way to get to heaven, the only way, legitimate way to live a good life. And so for him, those two things, he was this blinding certainty that he knew better than anybody else who read the Bible what it meant. And he would have these arguments with people. He was constantly, I look, when I say, you can find it in the letters. He was constantly, and he kept everything, like all these letters, and he would read to us from them in church. So he was constantly, picking fights with people about other churches, how they, came to their beliefs and why they were wrong. It was something that we talked about all the time, all my years at Westboro, examining other people's beliefs and memorizing the chapters and verses that show why they were wrong. So Gramps, he just believed that he was right, that his understanding, he had such strong faith in his own understanding. And so he was ruthless about it. He was willing to do anything, no matter how clearly wrong it seems to other people. So why is it a generational thing? Partly because before his children understood, and grandchildren, so before we understood fear of God and fear of hell, we understood fear of pain. So he abused his children, and it's hard to say that. Like we always would say spanked. He spanked them, he abused them. And so for my mom's generation, they abused us, though it was not nearly to the same degree what was inflicted on them. So that's the beginning. The beginning is you make these children understand that they are subject to you and to your will, and that they are going, by God, they are going to bend to it. And then eventually they get old enough, you don't have to keep beating them. because now you've instilled in them this ideology, these doctrines that you have taught them are unquestionable, that to question them is to bring eternal torment on yourself, and then not just eternal torment, but the curses of God in this life, that if you question them, you either leave voluntarily and lose your whole family, or you get kicked out and lose everyone and everything that has ever been important in your life, and you are left with a world that you've been taught is evil. And so there is no, it is that kind of indoctrination, and then the thing is, he taught us that same blinding certainty. This is the way, and there is no deviation from it. And so this is why I think one of the maybe the biggest change in me is this idea that I write about at the end of the book, and I cannot remember where I first read it, but it's this phrase, epistemological humility. It was something that Gramps lacked entirely, and I think it is almost completely absent from Westboro and groups like it. And it's the idea that yes, we all have beliefs. We have experiences that lead us to beliefs. But epistemological humility is doubt. It is the willingness to hold these beliefs a little more loosely, to recognize that there are so many things outside of our experiences and our understanding that we don't know, that we cannot know because we haven't had those experiences. So to be willing to be open to those things, to hear other points of view, to reflect on them, and to, ultimately at times, to be changed by them. Gramps did not have that. He did not have that. He could not hear that. And he taught us not to hear it too. And then gave us every reason to stay, to make it difficult to leave. They never physically impede anybody from leaving. All of the bars, all of the chains are mental.
Betty, you had the question, I believe.
Thank you. Let me get my mind back together here. It was a personal bias that had a glaring light shone on it inside of me when Megan was talking. And I think when she said both of her parents were lawyers, attorneys, whatever term she used, I realized that I assumed that she came from a background of ignorant people. And that's, I need to remember that aha moment. Thank you. Thank you so much, Megan. It's been really wonderful to meet you.
Thank you. And it's interesting. I mean, I do want to highlight that the education aspect of it. So basically, almost everyone at Westboro, as you grow up, they put a lot of emphasis on education. So it's one of those things about whether you call Westboro, a cult or not, but groups like that, these high control groups, education and intelligence are not enough to save people from that kind of thinking. And in fact, as I was just talking about with Gramps, I actually was reading, I think it was in the New Yorker, smart people, intelligent people are actually more likely to join groups like that because they believe that they can't be deceived. Like they believe so strongly in their own intellect. Because again, smart people generally know they're smart. Like they have a good grasp of what's happening around them. But it's just that, again, it's the lack of willingness to recognize the limits of your own understanding. And this is why, the smarter you are, I mean, like truly, like if you're wise, it's that recognition. There's a lot you don't know, that kind of humility is not part of it. That kind of humility is subsumed by the certainty in groups like Westboro.
One of the interesting things about con artists is that the easiest people to con are people who believe they can never be conned. That's the mark of a mark, so they're always looking for the people who believe that they know, and they are not the ones. The other people are stupid, but me, I know the truth. Those people are like, they're perfect marks.
I have a question. Yeah, one of the things that I'm having hard to deal with is, how do you deal with people, everybody's parent, well, not everybody's parent, but usually the example is this, okay? One of my friends on Facebook posted what I considered racist, hateful stuff. And my response was immediately, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you posted this hateful, racist stuff. I would never have imagined you would post such racist, hateful stuff. And then you know, and then I went on to say why it was hateful and racist. And and her daughter jumps in and says, how dare you speak to my mother and try to put her in her place? She's the most wonderful person in the world, all loving and all the rest of it. And she goes on and on and on. Now, one, I try when I'm responding to those things not to say, you are just a horrible, worthless person or anything like that. I say, why did you post such horrible stuff? And I can't believe this. But the point is, bad guys have good people. They are loved. They're just a wonderful, most wonderful person in the world. And so what do you do with this? I mean, I eventually did come to a place of explaining, if you don't understand that something is hateful, then don't share those posts. But I'm digressing. The point is, if everybody is good and wonderful and just by their companions, and yet they are hateful and all the rest of it and sharing hate, what do you do with stuff like that?
For me, things like that, the fact that you have somebody defending them. I mean, I have some ideas about how to engage maybe better. Like, so for instance, in that situation, if you had, instead of commenting on it publicly, send a message privately and ask, like, you know, why did you post this? You know, this is, sometimes the public nature of it causes people to shut down itself, right? It causes you to double down on your position because now you have to defend your goodness, right? Your intentions. So by taking it private, and so that's one idea. But to answer your question though, what do you do with the fact that people who do horrible things also, and say, you know, hateful, cruel, racist things, also have a good side, clearly, because they have people defending them. To me, that's a really hopeful thing. Because again, if you have somebody who is just an evil person trying to do evil things, there really isn't a lot to work with there. But if they're a person who has posted something like that because they believe, for whatever reason, that that's true and right, then there's something to tap into there. There are good intentions that you can tap into to try to reach them and change their position. So this is one thing about, and I'm not saying you were engaging in this at all. But it is a thing happening right now where they call it, call out culture. The idea that it's like, as individuals, our status on social media, especially, is bolstered when we call out other people for, and again, I'm not saying this is what you're doing at all, but it is a thing. People want to use shame as a tool to change people's mind, to call them out, and to demonstrate to others that they're wrong and that they shouldn't be followed. The problem is that shame, I was talking to an anthropologist about shame, and she was defining it as, it's the feeling that you get when you know that you have violated the norms of your community. So if for some reason, if you have othered this community, then you don't care if you hurt their feelings. Those aren't your people, right? So shame is a powerful tool, but it only works with people who already agree with you. That's the short version. So in other words, finding ways of tapping into that the good parts of them, right? The one that raised a daughter who wanted, or a child, I can't remember if you said daughter, who wants to defend them. They've clearly done something right. Who is that woman? Where is the kindness and gentleness that she raised that child with? Or whatever the thing is that child loves. Can you see that person in a more gracious light and try to help them see, like recognize whatever limited viewpoint they have that caused them to do that? How can you add to that person's cauldron, for lack of a better word, to help them recognize that here's why that's harmful. And it often helps, there's a lot of talk about intentions now too. Like, impact matters more than intention. And I think that's true. But intention does matter, right? Because if somebody does the wrong thing from the right intention, then again, that's something that you can tap into. If you can acknowledge that they did it for whatever, and again, I don't know what this person exactly posted, so I don't know what it is or why they might have done it. But if you can acknowledge a good intention, even in the conversation, like, I can understand why you thought that, given whatever, then, but here's what you're missing. If you can come at it from that kind of a perspective, it helps you feel more grace for them. It helps you demonstrate more grace from them, and they will feel that. I felt that from people.
I guess there is, just to make it easier for you, the post was of a young Black man with his pants down, that's fashion. Yeah. And right next to a Confederate flag, a Confederate statue. Mm-hmm. And the thing was, people are all upset about removing statues. What about this boy? And I was just scandalized, because one is fashion, which who cares? And the other is something deeper. And I could not imagine that she did not see the juxtaposition of the hatred that was being spewed on the young Black man. And I know it was racist because this was right next to a Confederate statue. So those things, my thing was just simply, and I hear you, maybe I could call her out by the side and say, hey, that wasn't so good. But the point is, it's public posting. And so she is pretty much serving to augment the hate. Right. And by choosing a young Black man, she didn't just choose anybody with their pants falling down. It was a young Black man. And I see that even more adding to the attack that young Black men feel already, now juxtaposed against the statue thing. But I hear you. I did talk her through, and we did come to a good place.
That's really good. The thing, I will just to answer one more thing about what you said about the fact that it's a public post. I definitely hear you, and there are definitely times when you feel like it needs to be public. One thing I will say though, I still reach out to my family at Westboro. It's a very one-sided relationship. I am sending things to them, trying to show them, the error of their ways, basically, to help them see outside of that ideology. And a lot of it is private, because I know that when you do it publicly, we're putting them on the spot, right? And because they have dedicated so much of their time and energy to proclaiming this message, they feel like they have to double down because it's public. So I'm giving them time and space to think and change privately. And then the thing is, ultimately, if you can change their minds, if you can actually reach them privately, that change is demonstrated publicly. So when I convinced them that, or I was part of convincing them that certain of their signs were unbiblical, that eventually came out with their first public disavowal of a picket sign ever in their entire history. So eventually those changes do demonstrate publicly. And and so it still can be a very effective thing, that kind of private communication. I just didn't want to, but I also, again, I understand if there are moments when you feel like it really needs to be public.
You know, this conversation, I think, could go on and it would be really useful, but there are time limits and we've kind of reached ours. I really, I really want to thank Megan, and I hope that you all will pick up a copy of her book, however you can get it. And she has a lot of interesting points in the book. And also, I would suggest you go and watch her TED Talk video. It's on YouTube. So you'll learn a lot of things about her. If you have book clubs or anything like that, you might want to see if you can read her book and discuss some of the points. Now that you've met this esteemed character, you can have a little deeper conversation about the book. I want to thank all of you for joining us and hope that you'll join us again next week, same time, same station. And we'll have another exciting event. Thank you again, Megan, and thank all of you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for moderating, Lawrence. And yeah, thanks so much to the South Dakota Humanities Council for making this happen. It's really amazing conversations. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Lawrence.
Bye.